The air in London was cold and heavy that morning, carrying the smell of damp stone and burning wood. A crowd had already gathered before the sun rose, thousands of men and women wrapped in cloaks, their breath rising like mist in the pale light. They stood in silence outside the grim walls of Newgate prison, waiting for a spectacle that had haunted English justice for centuries. The words, hung, drawn, and quartered echoed through history as a punishment so dreadful that even whispering it made hearts tremble. It was not just a sentence of death. It was a declaration, a warning carved into the soul of the nation. And today, another man was about to face that fate. In medieval England, treason was not just a crime, it was the unthinkable sin against the crown itself. To betray the king was to betray God's chosen ruler, the living embodiment of order in a fragile world. The punishment had to be more than execution. It had to be an example. The condemned man, accused of plotting against the monarchy, had been held in chains for weeks. His name would soon fade into the dust of time, but his screams, his final words, and his courage or despair would live on in the stories told by those who watched. Each brick of the prison seemed to breathe with the memory of others who had met the same fate before him. At dawn, the prisoner was brought from his cell, pale and trembling, his clothes torn by days of confinement. A heavy rope bound his wrists. He was placed upon a rough wooden cart, drawn slowly by a horse through the cobbled streets. Crowds pressed close, some jeering, others weeping, some crossing themselves in fear. Children clung to their mothers, watching history's darkest ritual unfold. The cart rolled past familiar landmarks, the marketplace, the tavern, the church, places of ordinary life that now watched extraordinary cruelty. And all the while, the condemned man's eyes searched the crowd for one merciful face, but none met his gaze. The road to the gallows was long, not in distance but in dread. The prisoner could see the wooden platform rising in the distance, surrounded by guards, priests, and the executioner's men. Bells tolled from a nearby church tower, slow and solemn, each strike echoing the heartbeat of a man walking toward eternity. Some in the crowd murmured prayers, others whispered curses. The prisoner's breath came in shallow bursts as he tried to summon courage from the fragments of faith still left within him. He knew what awaited, the punishment no soul could endure in full. Yet he walked on, because there was no path left but this one. The executioner stepped forward, his face hidden beneath a hood, his voice cold and practiced. The herald read the royal decree aloud, a proclamation of treason and divine judgment. The words were written in elegant Latin, but everyone understood their meaning. The man before them had been condemned to the most severe punishment the law allowed. The king's justice would not be swift. It would be remembered. The crowd hushed as the priest offered final prayers. The condemned man bowed his head. The noose hung before him, swaying gently in the wind, a silent promise that the will of the crown would prevail, no matter the cost. The drums began to roll, slow and rhythmic. The prisoner was led to the platform, his hands bound behind his back. He looked up at the gray sky, vast, indifferent, eternal, and whispered something only he could hear. Then, with a final breath, he stepped forward. The trapdoor fell open. The crowd gasped, some turning away, others watching in solemn fascination. The silence that followed was unbearable, broken only by the creak of the rope in the cold air. Time itself seemed to hold its breath, as though even the heavens were unwilling to witness what came next. When the executioner released the rope, the body was taken down with care, not out of mercy, but by design. Every motion, every order, was part of a centuries-old ritual meant to turn punishment into a warning. The king's men moved like actors in a grim theater, their faces set in stone. The condemned man's story was ending, but his suffering would become legend. In the eyes of the crown, justice had been served. In the eyes of the crowd, something darker had been revealed, the terrible truth that power demands not only obedience but fear. When the deed was done, the silence that followed felt endless. Even the loudest voices fell quiet. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. The wind carried away the smoke from the torches, the smell of ash and iron lingering in the air. Some muttered that the punishment was too cruel, others whispered that it was necessary. But all agreed on one thing: they would never forget what they had seen. This was not justice in the modern sense, it was control, spectacle, and a reminder that in the shadow of the throne, every life was fragile. As the crowd dispersed, the sky turned red with the dying sun. Merchants packed their stalls, guards marched away, and only the echoes of footsteps remained. Those who had come to watch carried the memory with them, a memory they would share for years, each telling it a little differently, each haunted in their own way. Some claimed to hear the condemned man's last prayer in their dreams. Others swore that justice had gone too far. The streets of London returned to their restless rhythm, but beneath the surface, a chill lingered, the shadow of fear left by one man's final moments. Centuries later, the words, hung, drawn, and quartered, still echo through history books and whispered legends. Historians write of kings, rebellions, and laws, but behind those pages lies something deeper, the human cost of authority. The punishment was eventually abolished, but its legacy never vanished. It remains a reminder of how far power will go to protect itself, and how easily justice can turn into vengeance when mercy is forgotten. The scaffold may be gone, but its lesson endures. When fear becomes law, humanity itself is put on trial. The story of those who were hung, drawn, and quartered is not just about death. It's about control, silence, and the fragile line between justice and cruelty. These men, traitors, rebels, or simply victims of politics, faced a punishment meant to erase their names, yet history refused to forget them. Their suffering became a mirror reflecting the darkness of absolute power. Moral: true justice is not found in punishment, but in mercy. And when nations trade compassion for fear, they lose a piece of their soul that no king can ever restore.